Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'm Alan Ewing, Executive Director and Secretary of the OnGo Alliance. Welcome to our annual meeting, first day kind of kickoff. We've traditionally done this as OnGo 101. We decided we'd mix it up a little bit, try to bring some additional content into this picture for folks. Keep it fresh, keep it interesting. So that's why we have renamed it OnGo Insights. So hope to give you a little bit more depth and some additional stories to learn about instead of the basics. A lot of folks have got the foundation. That's not to say we won't touch on some of those foundational things in my section, but maybe give you a little bit more, some other interesting bites out of all of this. So if we go on to the next slide, Josh, talk about our agenda for today. First of all, please remember that you are welcome to ask questions. There is a staged chat window. You'll be able to see that on your display, and feel free to submit questions to us as we go along. We will answer questions as possible during the session, but we will also make a record of your questions and try to cover those after the fact as well. So for our agenda today, my introduction, then we're going to have some interesting presentations around coexistence, the 3.45 band, which a lot of folks very interested in, PAL coexistence inside of the band, the PAL channel assignment, secondary market. We'll have some interesting stories from folks that also reflect a little bit of what we did back for the OnGo Awards that we did back in January now, where a couple of the winners will talk a little bit about their deployment stories, what they've learned, some of the best practices, etc. And then we will wrap up with what has become a crowd favorite, our Sas Administrator Panel, where each of the Sas admins are represented, and we have some questions that we can put forward, have a discussion, and see where that takes us. Also field questions from the audience. With that, a little bit about the Alliance from me to get us started. So many of you are aware, many of you may be new, but this is something we start off with in general. So this is really the OnGo Alliance as of January 1st, formerly known as the Cbrs Alliance prior to that. Really the mission that Cbrs Alliance started with was to bring spectrum sharing utilizing 3GPP based technologies, in particular LTE at the time, and now 5G and R, into fruition, make it happen. What we realized over the last even 18 months now is that with Cbrs, the band beginning to become reality, and a lot of the good foundational work that had been done, is it was time to start thinking what next. And so a lot of strategic discussions took place at the board with others as well. And what we realized is we could take the things that we've learned, share them with interested parties around the world and in other bands, and expand our scope of operations as needed. So what we decided to do to allow for that possibility was really, we needed to rebrand. And so OnGo, being the brand name that we had selected for spectrum sharing using the LTE, 5G, and R in the Cbrs band, it seemed logical to expand that band beyond that. So that's where the OnGo Alliance naming came from. Officially, as of January 1st, that's how we operate. We did update the bylaws, etc., accordingly. What you'll see here is just a little history lesson. If you've been with us from the beginning, and there are a few, I think even on this call, that are among the old hands, what you see here is the timeline of where we've come from and where we're going. So all the way back in 2010 is when NTIA identified the band for possible shared use. We moved through all the way through to 2016, where after the FCC filings and rulemaking was done, the alliance was formed in mid-2016 to bring that to reality. And so the brand name that we now use, OnGo, at the beginning of 2018, and then the practical parts of getting this whole thing launched over the next couple of years until we reached full commercial service at the beginning of 2020. 2020, of course, a year with some added complexities, but in spite of that, the work that we've been able to do, to surmount the challenges, both technical and just the challenges in the world, I think speak really well to what's happened, the participants, and the foundation that has been built. And then, as you see here, beginning of 2021, we are now the OnGo Alliance. So if we go on to the next. A little bit about our structure. Many of you are familiar with this. Many of you participate. Some of you that are new to the world, and we haven't necessarily had a chance to chat about this. The work is really done in 5 working groups. Those 5 working groups each have their own charters, their own leadership, and they fit into a piece of the overall work plan and strategy. So you see here the first 3 on the left are fairly self-explanatory. If I've been on a call with you about this, you've heard me say that before. But marketing, of course, doing the messaging, communications, etc. Technical, developing our specs, and looking towards the things that we need to build on top of 3GPP to make this a reality. Test and cert, taking those specs and building certification programs, our OnGo certification program that is supported by the specs developed in the technical working group. And then finally on the right, the 2 groups that really feed the whole organism of the Alliance, which is the business working group and the deployment and operations working group, looking at the ecosystem business from a vertical perspective, hospitality versus medical versus industrial IoT versus education. The list is virtually endless. Again, if you've heard me talk to you directly about these slides, I tend to use that expression because really the number of verticals is only limited by our imaginations. And then finally, the deployment and operations working group, looking more at the horizontal elements of the ecosystem, roaming, security, neutral host, etc. So how does this all fit together from what verticals need to support their work and the technology that needs to be fed and the thinking that needs to be fed and the practicalities that need to be fed back into the other parts of the organization. So at the top, of course, our board of directors, myself, our staff, and all of the officer positions to help oversee the work and make sure as an organization we are heading in a consistent and well-managed direction. We go on to the next slide. Membership, it's I believe today we're at 187 members, 186 members. We go up, we go down. The issue about going down this past year, we had quite a few of our members purchase other members, so we had some consolidation in the ranks. We did lose a few companies. Weren't able to continue operations. Few changed strategic direction, but we've already added nearly 20 new members this year, even already. So the interest and the expectations of the ecosystem are quite high, and we've been able to continually feed in the kinds of companies that we need to help make that conversation as interesting, useful, and productive as possible. We'll continue on. And that really takes us up to our first segment that we would like to jump into, and talking about coexistence with Andy Clegg and Mark Gibson, 2 gentlemen that think about this a lot and discuss it a lot and have a lot of really good insight. So Mark, Andy, I'm going to invite you guys up and turn it over to you, gentlemen.
All right, thanks, Alan. And so Andy and I have a deck here. We're going to tag team it. So if you'll go ahead and go to the first slide. And we only have about 15 minutes, so this is really it's going to be a survey of what's going on in the band, more or less as it pertains to CBRS. So this slide really summarizes everything that happened with the rulemaking. Basically, the rulemaking itself was driven by the Beat China Act, certainly in terms of the timing, that wanted to have the band auction by the end of the year this year. The rulemaking set up a new rule part. So that means that there were enough things about it that were unique that it had to have its own rule part. There's a lot of stuff that's consistent with all the other stuff that goes on in miscellaneous wireless communications, but another stuff that was unique that it set up its own rule part. Basically, what they did is they allowed a non-federal fixed and mobile allocation in the 3.45 gig band, which heretofore had been, as most people know, federal only. So they actually added, there was federal primary, there was some secondary use in there. One of the things they did on the secondary use, there's really two types of secondary use in there. Mostly are their radio location or radar type stuff. They are allowed for the new entrants to relocate them. So there's going to be costs associated with that. A lot of those were high-powered radars that were going to be that we thought would cause some problems with Cbrs. There was about 7 or 8 of them. They will be relocated. I won't get into all this stuff about how the band is being shared. We don't have a lot of time to get into it. Important to note, there will be 10 meg channels. And, as compared to Cbrs, there are 10 meg channels. And so there's some parity there. Andy has a slide on this in a moment, but the maximum transmit powers in this band are consistent with C-band, so that in urban areas, you'll have about 1,640 watts per megahertz. That equates to about 3,280 watts per megahertz or per 10 meg channel. I'm sorry, about 16,400 watts per 10 megahertz in urban areas, and then 3,280 watts per megahertz in rural areas, which if you multiply that out by the channel bandwidth, that's 32,000 watts per 10 meg channel. So that's a lot. It gets into a lot of federal sharing. That's really not germane to this. This slide I used from another deck. Key things, there is no formal frequency coordination with Cbrs except for a requirement to coordinate on TDD sync, and we have a slide on that in a moment. The rulemaking said that they would treat interference into ESCs as interference into a primary service, yet they did not apply any rules to protection of ESCs. So we'll try to talk about that. At the same time they issued this order, they issued a public notice describing the auction. Comments opened on that, I believe, late last week. It was on the 8th, I think. So there will be a lot of comments on that. It's a very complicated auction, by the way. Very complicated. So anyhow, they'll have that. Right now, the auction's supposed to start in early October. That's certainly earlier than the end of the year. And then there's some delay. The deployments have to be delayed in certain areas for about 9 months. So that's really a quick survey of the band. Andy's going to get into the powers with respect to on either side of Cbrs. So next slide there, Alan. There we go.
Yeah, just we decided, to underscore the point that Cbrs is going to be a little bit challenged by its adjoining neighbors in the spectrum space. This plot is an attempt to show at scale the power that's allowed in the 3.45 gigahertz service, which is the red part, the red bar. As Mark mentioned, in rural areas, you're allowed up to 3,280 watts per megahertz. So that's the height of the red bar, 3,280 watts per megahertz. And on the right-hand side, above 3,700, is the 3.7 gigahertz service. And they're also allowed the same maximum power, 3,280 watts per megahertz. And then to scale is the green bar showing the amount of allowed EIRP from the Cbrs service, the maximum allowed. And you say, what green bar, you might be saying. It's the green bar that is about 1 pixel tall on this plot, because Cbrs is only allowed 5 watts per megahertz of maximum EIRP. That's for a category B. Category A is even lower. And so, it sets up a bit of power imbalance between the two services that exist or will exist on the two sides of the Cbrs band. So it's something, we think there are ways to deal with this. And Mark is going to get into some of the ideas that the FCC and others have had. But just to make you aware that there will be some considerations going forward for how we're going to coexist, both the CBSDs and also our ESC network, how they're going to coexist with these high power services on either side. So back over to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Andy. It's also worth mentioning, you can go back up one more minute, and thanks. It's worth mentioning that there is a proposal by Dish actually they filed that proposal initially on this rulemaking, the 345 gig rulemaking, and they've since filed it on the Cbrs docket to increase the power for Cbrs to two new categories, category C and D, with 62 and 72 dBm per megahertz respectively. Whether or not that goes through per se, it'll be hard to tell. Most that have been following this closely know that AT&T filed a similar request back in 2019. It was not agreed to, so we'll see. But that effort attempts to make the power in CBRS a little bit more in parity with the adjacent services on either side. And we're not commenting on it one way or the other than it's out there and it's kind of interesting. Okay, Alan, if you could go to the next one. So this one shows the out-of-band emission limits for the CBRS, or for the 3.45 gig band, and you can see the extensions into CBRS. You can see for the base stations that's there in the purple, they go down one channel over neg 25, and then two channels over neg 40, and then for the just pure adjacent for the user device, those are base stations. So for the user device, it's neg 13 dBm total. That caused some consternation among the traditional mobile community because that mask is not typical. I don't even think it's the same mask that's used for CBRS or for the C-band for CBRS below. And there was some concern that in order to be able to effectuate that mask, or at least to meet that mask, you'd have to either have specialized filters and or lower your power in on adjacent channel areas and adjacent markets or co-channel or co-market areas to meet that mask. So or to meet those requirements. So we'll see what happens in terms of deployment. But that's what's out there now, and that's the way it's going to be deployed, at least as far as we know. Andy, did you have anything to add to that?
No, that's good. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Next slide, Alan. So Andy mentioned, and I did too, the TDD sync coordination. So right now, what I've got here on this slide basically just sort of parrots the rules. So what you see here in the picture is sort of the concatenation, if you will, of the 345 gig band on the bottom, and those are channels A through J, and the CBRS band on the top, and those are channels, I'm showing just channels 1 through 10. So the interference would be minimally between channels J and 1, and possibly be as much as channels I and 2 as well. And the interference is more synchronization of TDD frames. As most know, there's configurations associated with TDD, which is time division duplex, to ensure that the TDD means that you're transmitting every so often, and then you're waiting for something to transmit back to you. And so if you have somebody transmitting in that interstitial space, you could potentially have deployment or interference. And so what we're trying to do is synchronize this so everybody's sort of speaking at the same time and listening at the same time. That way nobody's listening when someone's talking. And so the rules really describe a very basic approach that put most of the effort and the onus on the CBRS users, such that CBRS users can request information from the 345 gig users to enable TDD sync, but they will have to be aware of the operations, and so presumably there will be some means to do that. And then the CBRS operator, needs to also provide the same information back to the 345 gig operator. And indeed, the rules describe that the information needs to be sufficient to be able to allow synchronization, and the data that will be passed back and forth is still subject to discussion. So we're hopeful that within the Alliance and reaching out to the 3.45 gig community, once the auction completes and we know who the licensees are, we can either do it within the Alliance or maybe the Wireless Innovation Forum or some group that will help at least come up with some processes to allow for this. Again, what you see there in front of you is more or less what's in the rules exactly. So there is rules to address this, but you see in the italicized bit that it says that the 345 gig licensees are really under no obligation to make any changes to facilitate synchronization. So it would seem by virtue of that, if you read between the lines, it means that it's kind of all on the CBRS users to effectuate some changes to facilitate TDD sync. So we'll see how that happens. The rulemaking sort of opined on the ability of the SASs to facilitate data exchange, in which indeed, SASs will have all the data on the CBSDs that are being deployed. Nothing really on 3, 4, or 5 unless that information comes into the SASs. So there, by virtue of that, there's probably some role SASs can play in that. It still remains to be seen what we can do per se, or exactly. But nonetheless, the commission has said all they're going to in the rulemaking, and they want the industry to work things out, which is great. That kind of keeps them out of it. And so, we, the industry writ large, will work to try to come up with some process that works, that hopefully will be extensible to the upper portion of the band as well. Where the commission said more or less the same thing for the C-band, except not perhaps in as much detail. So we're hopeful that whatever models we can come up with to do synchronization and coordination, we can apply at the upper end with the C-band. Did you want to add anything, Andy?
No, the only thing I would add is, within the OnGo Alliance, some of the technical groups there, and then also within the Wireless Innovation Forum, working on Release 2 standards for next generation spectrum access systems. We're looking at the possibility that the SAS could be the go-between in passing the TDD synchronization information to the CBRS operators. We're not committed to that yet. We have to examine what some of the technical challenges of doing that are. But it is a possibility that we'll use the SASs to communicate the TDD sync information to the CBRS operator.
All right, yeah, that's a good point. So that's still yet to be worked out. Okay, next slide, Alan. This slide sort of just outlines, so we did presentations to some of the 8th floor people, some of the commissioners during the rulemaking process. And this slide really just pulls those points out. And essentially what it says is, we support in the Alliance opening that band. We think the more spectrum is better. But there's a lot going on in that band. What I didn't talk about, and Andy and I have been working on this, Andy more so, is what is happening to the systems that are in the 345 to 355 gig band, which comprise a bunch of radar. In fact, I think it's exclusively radar with a few exceptions. These are radars that we're dealing with now with CBRS. They're the ground-based radars. Probably some coastal, but mostly ground-based radars. What we ask them to not do is to relocate them into the CBRS band. If they're going to be relocating them, they should be relocating them down, hopefully out of the 3 gig band totally, but certainly down below 3450. We asked them to address coordination between 3450 licensees and whatnot. They did, a little bit. And as we have said many times, and Andy's done a ton of work on this, we're really worried about the potential for interference of the higher powered base stations below into the ESCs. So we've done a lot of modeling on that, and that could be the subject of an hour-long discussion on its own. And then finally, we think that interference could be, or at least the notification of that interference could be mitigated by something that the NTIA is working on called the incumbent informing capability, or the rest of us call it informant incumbent capability. Nonetheless, we have been talking to NTIA who are developing this. They've presented information on this several times, and we've had some meetings with them. In fact, Andy and I met with them last week, as well as several others, to try to better understand what they're doing in the context of all of the stuff that's being developed for these bands. There's also something being developed for the 345 gig band called the ASCS, which stands for Automatic Communications Systems Capability, I think it is. So there's 3 things coming out of this work. There's something coming out of DISA to help facilitate coordination with ground-based radars called the S3, which is something which stands for Selective System Scheduling, I think. There's the IIC and there's the ASCS. So this is sort of all in the mix, and we're hoping the NTIA can get together quickly to develop the IIC so that we can remove the ESCs potentially from the equation. Andy, did you want to add anything?
No, just to back up a little bit for people who may not be familiar with all the alphabet, the ESC is the sensor network that detects the DoD's radars operating in the CBRS band and informs the SAS, which then does all of the interference analysis and reconfigures CBSDs accordingly. The challenge that we have, especially with the 3.45 gigahertz service, is that service goes right up to the CBRS band, and in particular, the band that we use for ESC detectors. There's no guard band between the two. So if a 3.45 gigahertz service operator puts up a high-power base station very close to one of our ESC sensors, it could overwhelm our ESC sensor, and then by the rules, we have to declare the whole band in use by DoD radars, and then that can disrupt CBRS service. We obviously are going to do everything we can to keep that from happening. We've had meetings with the commission and with NTIA to explain our concerns over this. And the IIC, just to boil all this down, is instead of us sensing the DoD operations, they simply just tell us when and where they're operating. So we don't have to put sensors out. So the whole concept of interference goes away. IIC is really pretty much a cure-all for a number of issues with ESCs, and the DoD and NTIA are heading in the direction of IIC. It's just at this point, it's how fast can they get there and where the funding comes from and things like that. So on behalf of the Alliance, Mark and I and others have been working this issue, and so hopefully, we'll have a resolution to this in time or shortly thereafter that 3.45 gets operating. And by the way, this is slightly less of an issue with the 3.7 gigahertz service on the upper end of the band, because there we have a 50 megahertz guard band between where ESC sensors have to operate and where the 3.7 gigahertz band starts. So we can deal with that, we believe, with good filters and things. But on the bottom end, the 3.45, there's no bandwidth separation at all, so that's more challenging.
So that's a good point. And that's for interference into the ESC. So there's a question in the chat about how do operators coordinate synchronization with each other, and so the question is, how do different operators coordinate synchronization with their network timing with each other? This is a similar challenge to what we might struggle with in GAA. And the answer is, the last part is yes, this is a similar situation. The first part is we have to work it out. We have been working within the Alliance to come up with some best practices for TDD sync, but again, that's sort of within the family, so to speak. With respect to coordination or synchronization on both ends, we're just going to have to work that. And part of that is getting together. Those of you that have been really following this closely know that in the context of the C-band, there were technical working groups that were formed, and within those there were some proposals. They just were never adopted by the commission. So we're hopeful that in time we can get together with everybody again, and there's a lot of consistency across the spectrum, and coordinate or develop coordination procedures on how we can do synchronization. But it's still to be done. So that's the answer to that. Anything to add, Andy? Okay. All right, Alan. Well, that's at time. So bringing you back in, and so that's it. Thank you very much, and we'll be hanging around in case there's any other questions.
Hey, Mark. Andy, thank you very much. We do have a question, but I think we can bring it back when we do the SAS panel.
Okay.
Because it's going to be pretty much along the same lines as our SAS discussion. Thanks, guys. As always,
thank you.
Outstanding.
Right. Great.
Very good. So we're off to a great start here. I'm going to turn it over now to San and Arful Hanan to talk to us a little bit about PAL coexistence. Got about 15 minutes, guys. That should be more than enough time to discuss such a trivial topic as PAL coexistence. But we'll turn it over to you guys and take it away, please.
Thank you, Alan. This is E from Google. So Arfa and I, we are going to use this session to give everybody an update on the PAL coexistence issue. So the OnGo Alliance technical working group has been working on coexistence issues from the very beginning, at least for a few years. And we have been focusing on mostly in the beginning on the GA coexistence issue. And given that PAL is going to be commercialized very soon, actually starting roughly next week, all the SAS administrators will commercially support PAL. So the PAL coexistence issue becomes quite important and quite urgent. But before we touch that issue, let me give a quick overview on the GAA coexistence topic, because the the issue in some sense are very similar to the pair coexistence issue. For the coexistence issue, basically in technical working group, we divide this issue into two areas. One is the channel allocation, and the other is Tdd configuration. For channel allocation is particularly important for GAA channels, GAA CBSDs, because we want to make sure that the CBSDs using the GAA band, they are somehow coordinated regarding the channels they are using, so that they don't cause interference with each other. But for pair users, the channels are predefined. So the channel allocation issue for pair CBSD is not that significant compared to the GAA channels. However, that doesn't mean that there's no pair coexistence issue in terms of channel allocation. One example that we have seen is the pair will require protection from not only GAA users, but from pair users as well. And the protection is defined as a pair protection area. For pair protection area, basically it's defined as a group of CBSD using a particular pair license. And for an operator, they may have separate different multiple pair protection areas in a county, for example. And due to the requirement of Part 96, different PPAs, different pair protection area, they actually need to protect each other. And then that can cause some effect that is not desirable to operators. For example, CBSDs in one pair protection area may need to reduce their power in order to protect another pair protection area that belongs to the same operator. So that means the operators, their CBSD may need to reduce their power in order to protect each other, which is not a good outcome, because usually the one operator's network, they are planned before the deployment to avoid interference issue. They don't need the SAS to be involved to consider the interference issue and to protect each other. So this issue, sort of a pair coexistence issue, can be resolved at the SAS side by including CBSDs that they do not require, that should not be included in the PPA protection in a list, and then SAS administrators exchanging this list with each other to avoid such issue, to avoid protecting PPAs from each other. So this is the issue that we do not require new standardization in OnGo Alliance, and then that can be resolved with the existing protocol. So in terms of back to the channel allocation, the pair channel allocation is semi-static, and the coexistence issue due to channel allocation is much less compared to the GAA users. So I raised just one area that can be solved, and there may be other area that we will encounter in the future. But for now, I think this channel allocation issue for pair coexistence is a solved issue. So the focus of the group, of the technical working group, is mostly on the Tdd configuration issue, which is the second area that included in the coexistence discussion. Before I touch the pair Tdd configuration issue, I'll give a quick update on how we do GAA Tdd configuration. So the Tdd configuration issue, in summary, is we want to make sure that the CBSDs in a close-by area, that they will transmit at the same time and that they will receive at the same time. Similarly, the end-user devices, they will transmit at the same time and they will receive at the same time. So with this kind of requirement, we can avoid issues like the base station to base station issue, interference issue, and the end user device to end user device interference issue. Because base station always retransmit at the same time and receive at the same time, so they cannot interfere with each other. Similarly, the end user device, they always transmit at the same time, they receive at the same time, so they don't interfere with each other. So to have such a requirement, we use the term Tdd configuration in the LTE or NR term. So if base stations, they use the same Tdd configuration, it means that they will transmit at the same time, they will receive at the same time. So to make sure that this is mandated, we at the SAS side, we have to do some work to create a group of CBSDs that they have to use the same Tdd configuration. This group of CBSD is we call the connected set, a connected set of CBSDs. We certainly do not need to have all CBSDs in the whole nation to use the same Tdd configuration, because that will become very restrictive. The Tdd configuration basically determines the downlink portion of a LTE frame that should be used, and then similarly the uplink portion of the time of a LTE frame that should be used for uplink transmission. Depends on the use cases and the business model. Different operators may prefer different ratio of uplink and downlink transmission. Some prefers more downlink transmission, for example, to provide internet service. Some may prefer more uplink transmission, for example, for the security camera kind of applications. So to allow more flexible use of a Tdd configuration, we are trying to give Tdd operators to use their desired Tdd configuration to the extent possible, while avoiding the issue of using different Tdd configurations and then cause unintended interference in the connected set. So the way we create a connected set is we calculate the coverage area of each CBSDs. And then if we see two CBSDs, they have a coverage area overlap, then we will connect these two CBSD together, meaning that they should use the same Tdd configuration to avoid the interference. And we will create those connection across all the CBSDs connecting each other throughout the nation. And then we will find the different kinds of islands of CBSDs, meaning that the CBSDs in this island, they will be connecting with each other either directly or indirectly. And then in this island we call is a connected set. And then for CBSDs in this connected set, in one connected set, they should be using the same Tdd configuration. But for CBSDs in other connected set, they don't need to use the same Tdd configuration with CBSDs in this connected set. So in other words, CBSDs in different connected sets, they can use different Tdd configurations. But for CBSDs in the same connected set, they have to use the same Tdd configurations to avoid interference. That's basically the concept. With this concept, we will start some communication between the coexistence manager, which is part of the SAS, and the CBSDs. So first, the CBSDs has to tell the coexistence manager that what is its desired Tdd configuration, and what is its fallback Tdd configuration. So I'll explain this the difference of these two. The desired Tdd configuration, I think, is obvious, right? And when the coexistence manager received the desired TDD configurations from the CBSD in the same connected set, the coexistence manager will first look at those desired TDD configurations. If all the CBSDs want the same desired TDD configuration, then that's a simple solution. Everybody will use the desired TDD configuration. There will be no issue, and the CXM will just tell all the CBSDs go ahead and use the same desired TDD configuration. The problem is if the CBSDs in the same connected sets they have different desired TDD configurations. What should we do? So in that case, the coexistence manager will look at the fallback TDD configurations from the CBSD. The fallback TDD configuration can be only two configurations, two different LTE configurations, basically configuration 1 and the configuration 2. So each CBSD needs to tell CXM what is their fallback configurations. In case that the desired TDD configurations are different for the CBSD in the connected set, then the coexistence manager will look at the fallback TDD configurations, which can be either configuration 1 or configuration 2. And then it will become a voting process. Basically, each CBSD has 1 vote of their fallback TDD configuration. And the coexistence manager will see what is the majority preference. Is it configuration 1 or configuration 2? If the majority of the CBSDs in that connected set prefer configuration 1, then the coexistence manager will tell the CBSDs in that connected set, hey, you all need to use configuration 1 to avoid interference. Basically, configuration 1 is roughly a 50-50 uplink downlink ratio, and then configuration 2 is a more downlink centric. So at that point, it will become a voting process, and every CBSD has 1 vote. So that is the GAA coexistence design so far. And it's important to notice that this TDD configuration has to be applied to all the CBSD in the connected set, no matter what is the grant, what is the channel that is using. Basically, it's frequency independent. Across the Cbrs band in that connected set, all the CBSD have to use the same TDD configuration. So that's a rough quick update on the GAA side. I will pass it. The PAL coexistence has the same issue. I will pass to Arifel to explain the PAL coexistence on TDD configuration.
Yep, thanks, Yi. So I'll cover very quickly. Looks like we might be running out of time, but I'll cover very quickly what's going on the PAL side. So I think this is again Arifel from CommScope. So in the coexistence working group, we tried to come up with some methods or formulas to how to address and bring harmonization on the PAL TDD side as well, because I think he covered that the PALs are assigned their separate channels, they're assigned protection within the co-channel, but it depends how the adjacent channels going to interfere if the TDD configurations are not harmonized. So there are several proposals that they were studied actually, and they were initially the group was marching towards the understanding that there should be some weightage applied to PAL versus the weightage on CBSDs that are using PAL channel. But I think there were members brought in very, very good contributions on bringing other dimensions, aspects of the use. And I think I'll just use it as a campaign today that we do have a roundtable discussion on Wednesday. I believe E and I will be doing that. That might be a good place to go and discuss more detail. But the plugin for this would be, I would say that, so there are different ideas that has been brought in, not only the aspect of just PAL CBSD, but category B CBSD versus category A CBSD, whether there should be a weightage applied in terms of determination of the TDD configuration, as E was explaining, that how the harmonization or determination when the CBSDs are in an overlapping RF space, I would say. How do you determine that? Would you apply a little bit more weightage on category B because a number of category A CBSDs in a given area, let's say in an urban area, could be higher than category B? So I think all those aspects, I think, were discussed. The members brought in very, I would say, contributions that talks about all these different use cases. So I don't think it is challenging. I think it's one good thing about is that these different aspects of these use cases is great for CBRS because it is covering all these different, either could be a fixed wireless mobility, private network, LTE, uplink heavy traffic and all that. So all these rich use cases is great, but obviously throws some challenges for us to come up with in terms of specifying or putting something as a specification. And we don't want to over specify. At the same time, we want to make sure that there is enough flexibility and there is some methods in place so that we don't have a chaos as well. And I just want to connect with what Andy and Mark talked about, that if we have a good precedence here in this band in terms of how do we determine TDD, I think that framework will lead to better coordination between the two other bands. So I just want to do a quick check on time to see whether we are okay with Alan, and I can get into some of the detailed proposals and things like that.
Yeah, hi. Probably let's do a couple more minutes because this is a very important subject. But as you mentioned, you guys will be doing the roundtable, so that'll be a great opportunity for folks to get some more depth there too. But yeah, yep. Please go ahead for a couple more minutes. Yeah.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Alan. So I think what I'll do is cover little bit of the proposals that are in place. So the aspects that has been talked about, and he probably touched and gave a very good overview of it, is whether we should have there is defined mandatory configurations that we have defined, which is configuration 1 and 2. There are proposals whether we should have secondary configurations where applicable, and whether if there is no interference or potential interference, whether we should allow CBSD on their own to go to a secondary configuration. And the aspect could be, let's say, you calculate the TDD configuration in a place, and you figure out whether it's 2, the configuration should be 2. Now, can somebody, if there is less potential of interference, can resort to configuration 0? And there is some good aspects to it because the CBSD that's resorting to configuration 0, actually he's the one flipping that slot into an uplink, right? And that means that if he would be the one sustaining more interference probably, so he's taking a chance whether he can start transmitting on that configuration 0. But I think this aspect also couples in because depends on whether that uplink CBSD that is transmitting on configuration 0 is a higher power or not. I mean, it could be a CPE CBSD, then in case actually it is potential that he might also impact the downlink as well. But so all these aspects and use cases of this needs to be understood well. And I would say that we may not be able to solve all corner cases. And that's what I think we should focus on. And I'd invite all members, actually, I think there are great contributions coming on, but I would invite other members to come in and let's look at really practical use cases, and not try to solve all the corner cases, but solve at least 80% of the problem that we think we will encounter in the field. And I think we as SAS admins, we are all working together to kind of listen to all these aspects and make sure that we are able to actually make sure that the harmonizations and coordinations can take place properly in the coexistence manager. So E, do you like to add anything to it, or E?
Yeah, so this topic is still ongoing. We are trying to include it in release 4, actually 4.1 of the release. It's heavily debated. Like Arifel said, we really invite everybody to participate in this important topic. Thank you.
Gentlemen, excellent. I know it's a very complicated topic and deserves a lot more time. I know you guys have been given an enormous amount of time in the working group, the task group, but also invite folks to sit in on the roundtable because I think this may be an area. We've got a couple of questions that we'll shelve for the moment and maybe feed back into your roundtable when that comes up. So thank you guys. Greatly appreciated, and gave us a great flavor of the complexities that we're facing there, and also a call to action to the members to join us at the working group level to get involved. So with that, I'm going to invite Kurt Jacobs and Richard Bernhardt up to the screen here. I see these gentlemen. Thank you for being here. And some more information about PAL channel assignments and secondary. PAL is a big deal. Seems to be a lot of conversation here, guys. So we'll turn it over to you and put you under a little bit of time constraint to make you really go through. But I'll turn it over to you guys. Take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. On behalf of Kurt and myself, welcome. This is a very important area and there's a lot to cover. So we're going to cover it. Some of the materials that we're going to cover will extend over into other sessions. So if you need more detail, please feel free to give us a ring at the fixed wireless and in the business wireless group coming up tomorrow. We're going to be going over rapidly. Once you go to the next slide here. All the legal stuff there. Go to the next one. All right, here's some of the stuff we're going to go over today, and you can cut off all the stuff on fixed wireless because that stuff I'm going to do in the fixed wireless task group and in the business wireless group tomorrow. But Kurt and I are going to discuss the basics of PAL, where we are with PAL today, since there's some very important hallmarks coming up. We're going to talk about PAL channel allocation, how those channels are done and what's coming. We're going to talk a little bit about operation of PAL, what it means to go from the current environment where everything is GAA into a GAA, sort of union of a GAA and PAL environment. And then we're going to talk about the parallel thing that comes up by the FCC and the SASs bringing on PALs, and that is the start or trigger of the secondary market and its implications and opportunities. I am very glad that I didn't have to give the lecture today on COEX. That is a subject that we spent a couple years looking at, but you know, COEX is very important, and it'll also be very important for PALs. So we look forward to the answers on how everybody can get along in that range as well. And I know Kurt has some slides to show us how PALs get along with one another. So let's go on to the first slide and talk a little bit about what PALs are and what are unique about them. All right, so y'all know we had an auction and we sold off these things called priority access licensees. They are the middle tier of the three-tier CBRS experiment. They are protected from interference by the SASs from everyone except for the incumbents. They still have to protect the incumbents, but their purpose or their life cycle exists within the three-tier system, sort of right in the middle. This is not a regular license. It is a new form of licensing that provides access, but the great part about PALs is that it maximizes the use of CBRS spectrum, because if you are not using it, then you share it. So we're going to talk a lot about how you register a PAL and how PALs get protected in a few more slides as we go on. But understand that when you're not actually actively using a PAL in a region, it's available for use by GAA, and it has the characteristics of GAA. And by doing that, it makes it a very efficient use of the band. The 105 auction, as we said before, created both the availability and use of PALs, though it wasn't immediate. And we're going to talk about when the effects of PAL will take place, and it creates the secondary market. And the great thing about PALs is it invites new and extensive new uses. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, what are the basics of PAL? Some of this you may know, some of this you need a refresher, some of you may just nod off while we're talking about this stuff. Hopefully not the last one. So PALs are made up of segments of spectrum that are 10 megahertz in size, 10 megahertz blocks between the 3550 and 3650 megahertz band within CBRS. That's not the entire band, that's only 100 megahertz of the 150 megahertz. And the channels that they use are assigned by Sas's. Not all 10 of those blocks were sold at the 105 auction. 7 of the 10 were sold. So 7 of the 10 blocks can be occupied by PALs as sold, and the remainder are GAA. So GAA has 3650 to 3700. The 3 bands that are not occupied by PAL, and opportunistically anything that is left over that a PAL has not occupied. The term of a PAL is 10 years, and it is renewable so long as you meet some basic requirements and play a good player inside the ecosystem. And the spectrum allocation, which is dynamic and static, and I'll explain that in a moment, but is done by the Sas's. Why dynamic and static? Well, for the most part, the allocation of spectrum will stay with the PAL holder. We don't expect a lot of change except when perhaps there's an incumbent question, or if there's a swap, and we'll go into what that means in the future. But most PALs, once they're established, will pretty much stay with the holder through the term of their license. And that means that while it's seemingly a dynamic assignment, the nature of PAL assignments are typically static, which means they can be changed. The auction was an amazing one. It went for 76 rounds. They sold 91.1% of all the PALs in the spectrum for a gross of about 4.6. It's actually $4.59 billion in gross proceeds in the auction. There were 271 qualified bidders, and of those bidders, they bid on 22,631 possible licenses, and of the 22,631 licenses, they sold 20,625. So virtually all of the licenses that were offered were sold. They were sold in county sizes. Originally, it was bantered whether or not they should be PEAs, which is partial economic areas, or originally they were set to be census tracts, which were even smaller than counties. The FCC resolved itself that they would be on counties with county borders, and there were certain performance requirements. I'm not going to read them through, but you can read them in 9625 and see there's several performance requirements that have to be met for renewal. Let's move on to the next slide. No one party can hold more than 4 blocks of 10 megahertz in any given license region. So if you are AT&T or Verizon or any other holder of a PAL, you may hold 1, 2, 3, or 4 blocks, depending upon how you bid and whether you won, but you may not hold 5, 6, or 7. This was a limitation to allow diversity in the band and to make sure that parties had opportunities to get PALs. You also can't aggregate up. You can aggregate your PALs rather for up to the 4 that if you bought 4 at any given time. And if you have contiguous blocks that run county to county that were given priority by the FCC, and the SAS can assign by priority contiguous blocks between the counties. That allows for nationwide networks and connected networks where networks are PAL to PAL across different PAL counties. The auction winners were amazingly diverse and included cable companies and cellular companies, WISPs, universities, speculators, and industry-wide vertical markets. So this was a very diverse outcome, which means there will be diverse uses and diverse technology. And we are now entering the zone of PAL versus GAA, and what is to be used and how it should be used, and we'll get into that in detail. Let's go on to the next slide. All right, as we enter the PAL ecosystem, we have been operating on 150 megahertz of GAA. That is changing, and the expected date for that change is April 20th. I'm looking at my calendar, it's April 12th, so we're talking about just a little more than a week from now. We should be seeing the first early recordations of PPAs, our PAL recordations with SASs beginning April 20th by the SASs. The SASs were responsible for doing spectrum allocation, a very difficult task and one that I didn't envy on them at all, because they had to make decisions among those 20,000 plus licenses, who should get which spectrum and which bands, which channels should be assigned to them. So they're not all equal, and there were some differences. And so we'll go into a little more detail in a few minutes on how that happened. Equipment manufacturers have to line up for the addition of PAL to be able to use PAL and to understand the opportunistic GAA as it comes through. We expect a lot of new entrants, and it's expected that there'll be new types of uses, including private networks and new networks. CBRS PALs can be used to meet subsidy requirements. We expect them to be used extensively in RDOF and CAF2 deployments. And of course, CBRS in general is a 5G LTE and NR capable spectrum. So that we'll expect networks to expand. All of this can happen with PALs beginning April 20th. It's not a firm date yet, that April 20th date. It may change a little bit, but that's the range we expect. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so once you've got your PAL, how do you use your PAL? So the most important thing is that you have to register your PAL use with your SAS. It's kind of obvious, but if you don't comply with the rules in 9639, which are the general requirements, using the correct equipment, the correct CPI, the correct approach to registration, it's not going to work for you. So take a look at the main guidelines and the rules. 47 CFR 9625 is the priority access licensee rules. And you also are going to want to have a look at the protocols, the baseline specifications provided by WinForum to give you the guidelines that you must follow in order to effectuate your PAL. I've got a whole slide to discuss the PAL protection areas, and we'll go into detail what a PAL protection area is. But if you don't have one of those, you can't operate your CBSD. And as I said before, PALs are opportunistic in the sense that, GAA becomes opportunistic in PAL if the CBSD that's in the PAL is not in use. It actually has to be recorded with the SAS, and according to the FCC, once it's registered and authorized for use on a priority access basis by the SAS as consistent with the rules, then it can be considered a PAL. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, once you've decided that you're going to use PAL frequency and you are a PAL holder, you can register your PAL with the SAS, and you then get entered in as into a protected area called a PAL protection area. The default protection contour of that PAL is neg 96 dBm per 10 megahertz around the CBSDs, and these become collected into a cluster as you move together to move all of the CBSDs that you have in your network. This is not EUDs. This is CBSDs. Category A, Category B can be included in that, but for the moment, EUDs are not what we're talking about here. Now, a neg 96 by 10 megahertz contour can be pretty large, and when you start adding them together, the protection area can get a fairly good amount of coverage. So what I would suggest is that you don't always need that amount of coverage. And the rules give you an out. It says you can tell your SAS to declare that I want a smaller protection area. Perhaps you want to use another network where you're using GAA, or perhaps you're in an adjacent county where you have a PPA and you want to match them up differently. You may not want your PPA to extend as far as it possibly can. The SAS has the ability to reduce those. And as noted, if you're bringing together multiple CBSDs operated in the same PAL, you can cluster those together into a single protection area. And that's very important because that'll give you continuity of your network. The one thing that you can't do, and this is critically important, is exceed the boundaries of your PAL service area. So if your PAL service area is Los Angeles County, even though you may have registered a CBSD right at the edge of the county and a neg 96 by 10 contours around that CBSD, it is not going to extend into the next county unless you've purchased that next county as your PAL as well. Let's move on to the next page. All right, just real basic stuff. 3650 to 3550 to 3650, and any portion of which is occupied or recorded as a PAL PPA, is covered by the PAL protections. Excluded in that, though, are DPA or government-based notices, incumbent protections, or specific other protections, such as if you are on a border in a quiet area. Those things will impact your ability to operate a PAL, even though you have priority access. And on the flip side of this, if you're operating an opportunistic GAA, you are not allowed to interfere with PALs, and you have to make sure that that's the case. Let's move on. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt for a little while to give a little bit more detail about how the contours that we've been talking about, these PPAs, operate and how PAL coverage is examined. Kurt?
Hey, Richard. Kurt, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yes, I'm going to go over a couple quick slides to just visualize how these PALs work within a county and some of the rules. And the first thing I'd like to describe is that, particularly for the new folks, we've all seen the pyramid of the SAS of Tier 1, the PAL layer, and GAA. It's important to remember the SAS's role is to coordinate between those layers. This previous discussion was on coexistence, which is how the radios work within a layer. But within the PAL layer, the SAS does some extra calculations, as Richard was talking about, PAL contours. And the way it does that, and the way the SAS calculates things overall, is it takes a map of the Earth, of how it's formed, the topographical map, with no vegetation and no buildings, with one exception I'll talk about in a moment. And it calculates that negative 96 contour out. So on the middle of the slide, this is a picture of the actual map that they use in a digital format. And every 360-degree radial from where that PAL CBSD or radio is broadcasting, and it has to be actively broadcasting. It can't just be registered, not transmitting. And it's good for 7 days from after it loses its heartbeat. The SAS will calculate out every 360 degrees along that radial until it gets to negative 96 dBm, and it'll drop a pin or a vertex at that point, as I kind of show on the slide here, and it'll do that and draw this PPA contour. And that's the protection zone. Now, remember that it is, and if it's indoor, it would take 15 dBm off it. And the only exception is if it's in an urban area, they'll apply a weighting factor for buildings and clutter up to, I think, 1 kilometer from the transmitting point. And then they'll just use a normal, what's called a regular terrain mapping model. So if you go to the next slide, and we will be discussing this in more detail during the business working group, which is open, I think, to everyone that member, non-member from the OnGo Alliance. So another way to think about these PPA contours is within a county, the SAS PPA creates these blue circles. Now it is, because it doesn't take into account vegetation and buildings and stuff, it's conservative. It creates a bigger footprint than what the actual RF coverage is, and that's to protect it. And as Richard said, it's got to be careful not to spill outside the county. And if there's multiples of them, they can form a larger PPA contour, as I'm showing with the Mickey Mouse ears there. Or if there's a big enough gap greater than 0.5 kilometer square in between it, it'll create an open area. Anywhere where it's not the blue circle is open for GAA. The SAS will also calculate all the interference from GAA broadcasters to make sure there's not too much power coming from GAA to impinge on the blue circles. Now, when we talk about sublicensing, which will a little bit, that within that PPA, even if you're in a building or underground and you're not getting the signal, that is still blocked. That is still owned by the PPA, the PAL license holder. The SAS only calculates where the coverage is. It's not actual coverage. So that also creates an opportunity, as we'll talk about, for sub-licensing and additional coverage within that PAL protection area. Now, what I'm showing here is only at one 10 megahertz slice. Next slide. So another way to think about this, and this is Kurt being somewhat flippant, is this is like cooking breakfast, the way this works. And you have to imagine we have a CBRS kitchen with 15 griddles on it. And on this griddle, the first thing you actually put on the griddle, if you click the next one more time, the first thing you put on the griddle is your eggs, which are the incumbents. Now, they could be your fixed sites, like an egg, and they're there all the time. Or you might be doing scrambled eggs with the ship's radar. They're a little bit more dynamic. Now, only, as Richard said, only 10 of these griddles, or actually only 7 of these griddles at one time of the 15 channels in CBRS can be used for PALs. Now, sausage, we'll call GAA, can cook on any of the griddles. So click the next slide. So what the PALs are like pancakes. So when you pour the batter, that's just like calculating the contours. It's got to spill out, and you don't want it to spill over the edge from the county to county, unless you have 2 griddles next to each other, as Richard said. But any space in between the pancakes, you can cook sausage for the GAA. And again, you have 15 of these. Next slide. Next click. So the SAS is what's like the chef deciding where the pancakes are going. It's looking where the eggs are being cooked, and it's looking where the PAL protection areas are, and then it's deciding who can cook the sausage where they will. And again, they want to make sure that the power from the GAA isn't such that it's impinging on the grease from the sausage. So that's my quick analogy to describe how this works. So a lot of people think PAL blocks out the entire county. It does not. People think that PALs are just going to take over, and it's only if they're actively transmitting. So we'll cover it in more detail. I'll try to give a couple minutes, turn it back over to Richard to cover, I think sub-licensing is next.
All right, thanks, Kurt. You've made me very hungry, that's for sure. And definitely, it seems like CBRS is not a vegetarian sport.
Right.
All right, let's move on to PAL frequency assignment, how this process has worked. As we noted, the SASs are responsible for the frequency assignment, and that's been a somewhat arduous task that without a doubt, we got to give a lot of credit to the SASs and some credit to WinForum, who provided some guidance, non-mandatory guidance to the SASs on how to pick out and choose their frequencies. I'm going to skip over some of this to get into the secondary market. We can go into greater detail on PAL frequency assignment later on. Why don't we skip to the next, maybe the next slide or two. Let's go one more. All right, let's see what has not changed. So all the rules remain in force. The fact that the PALs are coming online doesn't change Part 96. Part 96 already contemplated both PAL and GAA, which means that if you're registering equipment, yes, you do still have to use the CPI, you still have to go through the SAS, you have to do the whole thing. The tier system remains the same, though while before it was all GAA, now you're going to have PALs mixed in with that. If you want to see how those rules apply in the average operation of a CBRS network, take a look at the WinForum baseline specifications. You can go to the WinForum website, or their link is listed right there. Let's switch slides. Just a few minutes left here. All right, the next important and perhaps most exciting thing to happen because the PAL marketplace has opened is that the secondary market becomes viable, and the holders of the official holders now of the PAL licenses have the ability to lease, sell, or disaggregate their PAL should they not want to use their entire PAL. What does this do? Provides an opportunity for access to PALs without having to go through an auction. And believe me, seeing the C-band auction and some of the other auctions we've had lately where the fierce competitions and the amount of dollars have been going into the billions, might be a good idea not to have to go to an auction. Smaller operators can access spectrum through PALs if the PAL holder permits. It invites diversity of new uses because you can use small portions of a PAL or even large portions of a PAL for a specific use or even a private use. It allows for temporary uses of PAL rights, which means that you can segregate rights between long-term and short-term, and it potentially provides a lower cost option and open market possibilities. Let's move on to the next slide. So we can start using the secondary market as long as you are what's called an eligible entity, which means you meet the requirements to have bought a PAL in the first place. You can then trade in or receive or buy parts of a PAL from a willing seller. There are two really basic categories in the secondary market. That's leasing or de facto leasing and sale. Both are permitted under Part 96, and the timeline for entering these things will vary. The priority access licensees may be able to enter the information one of two different ways. They can go to a broker or they can do it directly with a party and then have a SAS, or managing SAS is usually the best way to go, enter that data into the ULS. Once they've entered that data into the ULS, the lease becomes viable, and the party all the SASs will know that leased area is available for PAL registrations. The other way of doing it, let's go on to the next page, is to enter something called the Form 608. It's a bit of a dreaded form. It's where you can personally go in and record your own leasing information from a lessee with the FCC. It can take several weeks. It is about 60 or 70 page venture, and get your writing hand out because it can take quite a bit of writing to get your information through. So I suggest, if it's possible, if you want to use the leasing, sale, and disaggregation portion of PALs, that you work with your SAS in order to be able to record your lease. There will be a PAL database that will be hosted by WinForum, and in fact, that database will give guidance to the SASs as to who owns what within the PAL holdings. Let's move on to the next page, and I'll sum up just so that we cover secondary market a little bit. So the PAL database itself is populated from the spectrum allocation data from the SASs. As I noted, it's hosted by the Wireless Innovation Forum, and it identifies who holds what rights in PAL. Let's move on to the next page. All right, the secondary market has a framework which allows different parties. It can be a broker, it can be an individual PAL holder, it can be a speculator. Each one of those parties has the right to make, sell, lease, or come up with a deal in order to take care of PAL spectrum that is not being used. A SAS can accept or reject leasing notifications, and it can use the SAS to do its recordations. We can do long and short-term leases, though I got to tell you, the really short-term and really small leases may be difficult based upon the light touch, which is a mechanism designated in Part 96 and by the FCC to do rapid recording in the uniform licensing system. May be difficult to do really short-term leasing. So we expect, at least in the beginning of this process, mostly mid-term and longer-term leases are what will be viable. There may be a short-term option coming along. And in this, we can do things which are very specialized. You can do things for events. You can set forth areas or regions that you want private networks. You can set forth areas or regions that you want to do basic services. But it's very, very important to have the secondary market. Let's move on to the next slide. All right, so this goes into fixed wireless access, which is beyond the scope of this particular presentation, but it should whet your appetite for what we're doing tomorrow. I want to thank Kurt for giving a presentation with me, and we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth information. I know there were some questions. We'll get to those as well as time permits. I'm Richard Bernhardt from WISPA. Thank you very much. Back to you, Alan.
Hey, Richard and Kurt, thank you very much. That was our brunch appetizer, I guess, for the discussions that'll be coming forward. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate that. And yeah, we do have, like you said, some questions, but we'll package those for a little bit later time. We've got some really good content, and we're taking up the time, which is fantastic. The next segment here, I hope you find really interesting as well, is we've been talking about a lot of the practicalities of making sure all this works, but it's also good to see that when the rubber hit the road, things, the deployments went, and we have things really in practice going from a commercial point of view. And so we have a couple of deployment stories that we'd like to share with you from folks. First up on our deployment stories, Trilogy Networks. So hi Nancy, and we have Vinky. Thank you guys for joining us. Very much appreciated. We're going to turn it over to you because we've been just going crazy on time today, and we'll ask you to take us through what you've been doing. So thank you for being here, first of all.
Terrific. Thank you. So I'm Nancy Shemwell. I'm the COO at Trilogy Network, and with me is Vinky Swaminathan, who is our CTO, but he's also one of the founders and really the brain trust behind this initiative that we're going to discuss today. Kurt, loved your example. I actually understood it, and I will never look at pancakes the same way again. And now what we'd like to do is spend a few minutes talking first from a business perspective, what's going on in the market, and then Vinky will translate it to what most of you folks will really enjoy, which is the technology side. So we are delighted to be here as one of the winners who have been recognized as the WISP Rural Deployment. We're really about bringing the cloud to the edge and fueling the industrial revolution. So if we could have our first slide, please. So when you think about what's going on, technology is fantastic, but what it is really doing is enabling a transformation. And everyone's on this call has heard about the Industrial Fourth Revolution. We're really seeing it as a tsunami, and we focus on rural America. And when you think about the digital transformation or the connectivity of everything to everything, you're talking about a marketplace that is really going to be revolutionized in the way that people work, live, and play. It's an enormously dynamic market, even in the metro areas, but out in rural America, extraordinarily dynamic. But as things move from the cloud to the edge, because of the tremendous technology that's being driven with machine learning, AI, and vast industrial IoT, I think you're going to start to see that really those business cases shape up first in a very large way out in the middle of nowhere, where low latency is a huge issue for robotics, et cetera. And that is driving some very tremendous market opportunities. There's, there are billions of dollars that are going into this. You hear a lot about solving the digital divide, but to get the type of technology we need out there, it's going to be beyond closing that digital divide and getting it true advanced broadband. This rural market is happening now because of the applications in farming, because of the applications in energy, and there are a number of sociological as well as government mandates that are helping to start make that happen. One of the things that I think is important to frame up is that across the globe, it is highly understood that with the rise of population globally, if we do not do something radical, we will be limited in our ability to feed the world in the next 29 crop cycles. So again, a lot of pressure from the government to be able to get more out of an average land without an incremental drop of water. So Trilogy and our partners, the Rural Cloud Initiative, are really leading that challenge to try to advance broadband solutions across rural America. Next slide. So now that I did our little commercial, what I think is important for you to understand here is that to solve this type of problem, one company cannot do it. It's really going to take a network of networks. So when we looked across this problem and how to solve it, we saw that there are 1,000 small carriers that need to be knitted together in some way to be able to have universal broadband across and consistent so that the likes of a John Deere can deploy the types of solutions that they want. In order for us to build those networks, we needed to bring together a number of technology suppliers. We build edge connectivity, cloud and storage, but the likes of Intel, Robin, Druid, Vapor all bring other incremental activities or support to those networks. And then there are a growing number of application providers with services that might be ag specific or energy specific, or they might be caching. They might be, a new slice to a 5G network. But we have built a large and very robust ecosystem that includes the carrier network, the telecom or the technology supplier, as well as the application supplier. On top of that, we have built an acres board of advisors from some of the industry executives that really shape the way that the world is coming, especially out in rural America. We have representatives in that team that sit on the board of the CCA, the CTIA, those that run the Rural Wireless Association, as well as Carolyn Chen, who is the 5G general manager globally for Intel. So a large subset of real market leaders in that space, and have recently added the outgoing USDA administrator. So we have a great handle on what's going on out in rural America. We've got a robust network. We've created that since June, and we're launched and ready to talk to you about one of our deployments. Next slide, please. So Hearst Greenery is the deployment we're here to talk about today. It is a great testament to this network of people that we have built. It includes 2 states. So it's a greenhouse, or 600 acres. There are 16 greenhouses involved in this. I think they create or grow most of the azaleas that are sold in grocery stores across the United States. We included 4 carriers to address their surface area, as well as 7 technology providers to address the problem that they had. Well, what was their problem? 16 greenhouses, 100 square feet, fiber to the farm. That was great. But they had extraordinarily limited Wi-Fi coverage. They had 0 automation. Their ability to manage the quality of their water, high salt content from their natural wells, temperature and humidity control was done by sight. Soil moisture, again, probably done by sight and finger. Manual planting monitor. There was really no way for them to get in and understand what was going on, turning on heaters, turning on fans, things that you and I might not think about that are important. And what's important here is they need to get the highest yield, right? They need to have the plants grow as large as possible. They need to have as little spoilage as possible. They also need to make sure that they're cost effective in their energy, right? So there's no point in heating a greenhouse that doesn't have plants yet, or being careful that you don't overheat, or that when there's a weather shift that you're able to make those changes. Insurance, any sort of cost reduction, as well as just human manpower. So this was the challenge that Blake Hearst had. He is the outgoing head of the Missouri Farm Bureau. So he was a great pilot test for us because he's able to help us share the word. And Vinky is going to share with you the deployment that allowed us to solve this problem, and by Blake's own words, has allowed him to save at least 10% in his productivity. Over to you, Vinky.
Thanks, Nancy. Next slide, please. Yeah, I will start off with how we are addressing this digital transformation in rural America with our cloud platform. We are building a nationwide distributed cloud platform, all tied together on a single network fabric with advanced edge solutions and a marketplace where these solutions can be clicked and deployed at any enterprise, be it a farm, an energy production site, an operator site, or any other enterprise that are looking for such advanced solutions. Can you click next, please? We have 4 different kinds of platforms for the multi-tier architecture of the distributed cloud. The Edge Hub is our regional platform that allows us to elastically scale and expand for capacity. And we have a hub and spoke kind of a model where this edge access the hub for the region. The region we deployed this Hearst Greenery solution is one such example, where we have massive cloud and storage capacity and processing capability, and it's elastic to scale that. Next, click next, please. The Edgegate is a platform for the telco edge that allows us to be able to aggregate traffic from multiple sources, from different farms, from different other enterprise sites, or even at cell sites. That's we bring in the traffic. We have an aggregation platform that allows us to be able to aggregate the data, apply AI and modeling and other artificial intelligence applications so that data can be processed in real time. And that gives us the ability to be able to turn back and provide real-time feedback to the end user on the data from the sensors and their devices. Click next, please. The Edge RAN is our platform for virtual network functions, particularly focused on 5G networks, where this Edge RAN accesses the cloud platform that powers the virtual network functions and the radio functions that provide the 5G network capacity. This can be at a traditional macro level cell site, a small cell site, or even a private network at an enterprise. Next slide, please. Our Edge site acts as a on-prem platform for real-time data processing and virtual network functions for security, network security, and securing the private network that we create in enterprise. I'll walk you through that in our cloud deployment at this Hearst Greenery. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, this shows overall how we deployed this at the farm. We approached it from a perspective of what applications that are we going to be having that to be deployed in this farm, and what kind of a network we need. As we evaluated the applications, we realized early on that we will need a private network. So we chose to go with the Cbrs network there and use LoRaWAN gateways to connect to the sensors themselves. The temperature sensors, the humidity sensors, the soil moisture sensors, and water salt content measurement flow meters. All of that operate on a different technology, but we needed the private LTE network so that we can get more coverage across the 16 greenhouses and the nearby wells, the grain bins, and a little bit of the broad acre acreage there. And so the ladder on gateways connect to our CBRS network, and then our CBRS network connects through the backhaul to our regional core. The model here is based on a partnership that we have with the regional partners in that area, so we can scale this deployment across multiple farms. The infrastructure we have created there can cover up to 8 counties, works with 4 different operators in that region, and gives us an immediate access to be able to deploy this kind of solutions across about 5,000 farms. That's a level of scale and that we want to create, so that it becomes much more easier and accelerated to get these kind of deployments out in the field. The coverage areas are much larger than a typical factory or an enterprise. So you have to look at how you can create something that can be scaled across a large region. And the solutions we are deployed, we work with partners there. The local partner, telco partner, provided us the backhaul. Intel provided us gave us the Intel openness platform that made us easy for us to orchestrate and deploy the applications, like in this case, the IoT application that manages the greenhouse microclimate management. And our partner for the IoT platform itself is Clearblade, that has a very nice IoT dashboard for automating much of the greenhouses in terms of the HVAC systems and the heating and the venting and all that. So you can have a complete feedback loop and maybe able to manage the environment in that automatically. Next slide, please. I'll touch upon how we created this and how our partners came together to make this happen. In a distributed cloud environment, it takes a lot of partners to bring multiple pieces together. So we created an application ecosystem that not only allowed us to bring the solutions together quickly, but also be able to have those solutions available to our end users as well. You see the likes of Robin.io, Pluribus, Matrix, and GenXCom, Lanner, Celona, Intel. They all contributed in so many different ways to bring the solutions together, from the infrastructure, the cloud platform, the virtualized network, the private LTE network with Cbrs in the Cbrs spectrum in partnership with Celona, Intel's openness platform, and of course our telco partners that provided the backhaul. So it takes a lot of partners to bring together such a solution. So one of the things as a takeaway for us was that early on, identify your key blocks of requirements or needs you have, and then select the partners that best fits that for your application or the solutions you're bringing to your customer. I think that is one of the key takeaways for us. The RCI ecosystem was essentially designed around that, and that helped us a lot to be able to bring these partners and bring their technologies together very quickly. Next slide, please. Yeah, you can see pictures of how we deployed got the radio installed. We put it on top of the farmhouse, the farm office rather, and that provided us coverage over those 16 greenhouses. And you see the grain bin over there on the left, where and coverage was available now all across these greenhouses. So that helped a lot us to install multiple gateways and be able to still use the one radio to cover them all. And then within the greenhouses, we had the temperature control, the moisture management, and oxygen sensors as well. And that gives real-time data for the farmer to have access to both historical data and real-time data in terms of fluctuations in temperatures and the humidity, and more importantly, optimizing the environment for the very good yield and growth of the plants. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. In terms of just good best practices, look at first what problems are we solving, what are the solutions that the farmers or your customers looking for, and then define what the network can do for you. I think that's kind of the approach we took, and that's our key takeaway from this from this project, and we look forward to do more such projects. And thank you to OnGo for recognizing our project, and thank you to all our partners who helped us make this happen.
That's right. And we would encourage you to go to ruralcloud.com. And if your company is not already a member and you're interested in what you're seeing, we'd love to have you come along and help us solve this problem.
Very
Thanks
good. Well,
again, Alan.
yeah, Nancy, Vinky, congratulations again on being one of our inaugural OnGo Award winners. A great tribute to the work you guys have been doing. So thank you.
Thank you. We're really honored.
Good deal. So next up, and apologize, we are running a little bit behind our schedule today. So keep that in mind. I'm going to turn it over. I think Jim's here with us. Yeah. Hey, Jim, turn it over to you. And if you can compress a little, that's great. But I want to make sure you get a fair shake on your time regardless. So take it away, Jim.
Okay. Thanks, Alan. Yeah, well, Geoverse and our network as a service offering, we were one of the inaugural OnGo Award winners for Best in Show, or whatever it was called. If you can kind of flip to the next slide, I'll give you a little bit of background on Geoverse. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of a pretty large telecom holding company by the name of ATN International. They have telecom assets and alternative energy assets around the world, or cellular carriers and a bunch of islands in the Caribbean and other places, and do some fixed wireless things. And in the US, we're divided into 3 business units. First one is a service provider solution business. We have traditional cellular spectrum, and we have about 1,200 towers with cell sites ranging from GSM to CDMA to LTE in 15 US states. And with this business, we're primarily a wholesale roaming carrier that kind of fills in the holes for AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. In that same footprint, we also have operated our rural and broadband service, which is a combination of fiber, being a WISP, as well as a brand name cellular service provider. So in that footprint, we're called Choice Wireless. As the rural carrier, we were called ComNet Wireless, and they've both been around for about 30 years offering this service. And then on the left, we're the new guys on the block. Our business unit is called Private Networks, and we're very CBRS focused. So we have the business model. One of our business models is network as a service, and that's what I'm here to talk about is kind of the lessons learned around that. But the other thing to point out is we combine engineering support, NOC operations, technical call center capability, customer care, even billing. We have a centralized resource to take care of all 3 of the business units, and so we have hundreds and hundreds of technical resources that combine to fulfill this. If you go to the next page, and the foundational elements of this network as a service is we are offering basically our carrier resources to partners and other members of the OnGo Alliance ecosystem, or don't even have to be part of the OnGo Alliance, who want to build a private cellular network using CBRS spectrum. And this ranges from a light touch situation to a heavy touch situation, but typically one of our partners will choose or select the RAN vendor who they want to work with. And we will supply the core elements either at an edge, in a cloud, or a combination thereof. We'll also provide a portal for analytics down to the subscriber level or the MZ level. And that same portal will provide service transparency back to the cellular operators if it's a public-private situation. And then we'll also have SIM services on top of that, with kind of our network credentials. So you don't have to worry about spinning up your own SIMs, and those same SIMs are recognized by the public carriers as being, part of a roaming or interconnect club. And then we'll provide that said interconnection to the public cellular carriers. You can flip to the next slide. And so I thought it'd be useful to point out some of the use cases where this network as a service has been in action. And we've been offering this model since 2019. And I don't know the exact number, but we have north of 20 commercial deployments using this network as a service. And if you go to the next page, you'll see one of our very early ones was the American Dream Complex, where that was one of the 5, I think, initial commercial deployments. But we had a partner, ANS, who led the deal. He brought in his RAN vendor of choice, JMA, and they built out a CBRS network to support initially electronic signage, but it's evolving to support a whole bunch of other things. And then I'll just real quickly review some of the other use cases where network as a service is an example. So if you can switch to the next slide. One of the other ones is what we call job site construction, where construction companies on a job who were using Wi-Fi and other technologies before have been evolving to use private networks and really high speed, robust voice and other services using CBRS because of the security elements. And a lot of times these are very fluid networks, so they need to be managed actively, and a lot of things are changing in this environment. And then if you flip to the next slide, another example, which is becoming the most popular use case of the 2020-2021 timeframe, and that's supporting remote learning, which is pretty much supplying a CBRS network and managing a CBRS network, so you can enable pretty much a CBRS enabled Wi-Fi hotspot that provides a no installation required type broadband experience for students on the other side of the digital divide. And if you've been following this, there's lots and lots of federal grant money available to support this use case. So it's been a COVID area use case that is probably the most popular, and we've been supporting this with our network as a service offering. Can you go on to the next page? So I'm probably gonna make up some time, Alan. That's probably not the one I was looking for. There we go. So what are the best practices? What are the lessons learned during the the 2019 to 2021 network as a service offering? The first lesson, and it's overwhelmingly the most important issue, is market conditions change, and we were prepared to support pretty much an in-building bursty data voice use case. That's kind of how we built the foundation of what we were going to offer. When COVID hit, and even slightly before COVID hit, the CBRS use case had shifted dramatically to more of an outdoor model, and technical support became critical. Things, even to this day, things don't operate as smoothly as you read in some of the press releases. So actively being engaged at a technical level, and I mean all levels of a technical level, whether it be at a NOC, whether it be with field engineering resources or engineering resources that are specialized in certain areas, have become absolutely critical. The other kind of surprising thing is how important a full edge core was to enable some of these outdoor use cases. When we got to the outdoor use cases, QoS and very high bandwidth became an immediate requirement, and not just in a pilot mode, but in a commercial mode. So how do you support those? And I think the answer was with a kind of being able to have a full core with a distributed HSS architecture. You had an immediate requirement for slicing when you got involved with some of these city or government deals, because it was essential to have separation of government units that were on a network. So, separate APNs for this department versus that department for different use cases. So it was more than just a local, data plane breakout. It was a control plane breakout from the core perspective. That became immediately something that was very pressing. And then these deployments, they weren't indoors, so you needed to kind of complete a jigsaw puzzle to become a combination of a WISP and a cellular carrier to the entities that were on the end. And sometimes the entity participated if it was a city, sometimes they didn't. So you needed to create this WISP/cellular carrier solution environment, and this included supporting citizens who may have a problem with their device. And a lot of times you're dealing with citizens that aren't very technically savvy, and sometimes they don't speak English. So you had to develop a multilingual citizen support ecosystem that worked back into a WISP environment. And in some of these projects, even billing, taking advantage of your billing platform was extremely important. And those are all giant lessons learned. Had you talked to me in early 2020, I would have never thought they'd be something we'd even have to worry about. And it has become more of an everyday practice. So, Alan, I think I made up some time for you, but be happy to
I appreciate that, Jim. It wasn't the requirement, but you guys, well done. And this is very exciting stuff for us all. This is what makes it real, and is really the part that shows that all the hard work is worth it, and will continue to be worth it. So
that's right. Thank you.
So I don't want to undervalue that for sure. This is where we've been fighting for. So, well, good deal, Jim. Thank you. Like I said, we'll have some questions. We'll put them together and get them out. Make sure everybody who's asking questions will make sure you get those answers.
Okay,
so thanks,
Jim.
You, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And congratulations to Jim and Geoverse as being one of our OnGo Award winners as well. Next up, Josh, where are we at? We are at the Sas Admin Panel. So a crowd favorite, as I ask all the Sas admins to join me up here on the stage. And it's my opportunity once a quarter to grill them en masse and ask them questions, and thank Sato-san for his dedication and joining us very early in the morning for him. So thanks again, Sato-san, for joining us. On the stage with us have Mark Gibson representing CommScope. So hi, Mark. Sato-san again, Sony, appreciate it. The screen just changed, so we got to catch up here. Back again for more. Thanks, appreciate it. Gautam, also good to see you here from Amdocs. And Masood, our cleanup hitter, who's always here to help us take some of the tough ones and give us some good answers on topics from Federated. So let me start off with a question here. So 2021 has been unfolding here, and Masood, I'm going to start off with you and work around the room. But what have we learned in this last 3 months or all of 2021 regarding the unfolding of commercial operation? What are some of the things that are really noteworthy that we should all be aware of from the point of view of the Sas admins?
Thank you. I appreciate you and OnGo Alliance and other Sas administrator in the panel. for the opportunity. Yes, similar to the progress that we made in 2020, we have seen growing interest in CBRS in the first 3 months of 2021. The number of CBSEs using CBR, there are some noise, Alan. I don't know whether it is from my side or.
I'll try muting and see what happens.
Okay, sorry. So the number of users using CBRS has been steadily increasing and growing up. In 2021, we are going more than about 120,000 CBSEs used in the CBRS, and that's an amazing progress given the coronavirus situation. And the fact that it's almost 1 year that CBRS has commercially started, so that's a big growth. So one of the major milestone that we are hoping that to meet in the next few days actually is the start of PAL, and we hope that by the start of the PAL, that growth would continue and actually be much more fast. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Masood. Sato-san, any insights from your perspective in how we proceeded in commercial deployments in the last 3-4 months?
Last 3 months, Masood already mentioned about we are looking for the PAL enablement right now. So we are concentrated working for the PAL enablement right now. So, but the next step we will be to some kind of the light touch leasing. FCC is defined that one. So, but still we have some discussion with FCC. So we will be working for that one for next few months. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Gautam, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think all of last year and early this year has been quite exciting. We see a huge uptake, like Masood mentioned. I think there are almost 135,000 CBSDs, if I read correctly, number of devices connected to various SASs across the country using the CBRS spectrum, which is extremely healthy. We also see that majority are outdoor. It's a very small percentage which is indoor. Also with PAL, there's a lot of interaction with all the PAL licensees. Everybody's pretty much got their channels in terms of what channels they will use for each of their zip codes. So the PAL licensees, pretty much most of that stuff is finalized. A week from now, we will basically have upgrades to all our SASs together. And then also in the last few months, some of you may not know, all the SASs have been working together, interfacing their software, and basically testing out all the aspects associated with PAL. So all the process of PAL protection, how do we get CBS to work properly? How does one CBSD not impact somebody else's area? So all of that work has been done behind the scenes amongst all the SASs. So we are quite confident that once we get to commercial next week, then we will basically have software that has been interworked many times over.
Very good. So I understood my audio was pretty poor. Is it improved again?
A little bit, yeah.
Good deal. So Mark, how about you from your perspective? What's going on, this first 4 months of commercial operation in 2021?
Well, that's, I'm trying to think of things I can say differently. I'd say a couple things. Obviously 2021 comes after 2020, and in 2020, RDOF money was made available, and I think a lot of customers took advantage of Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, $16 billion worth of money. So I think we saw some of that represented in, a slight uptick in transitions from the Part 90 to Part 96. That might have accelerated things a little quicker and gotten that done sooner than later. I also think that now we're beginning to see in a broader sense, in fact, as an example of the use cases we just saw, more of the use cases that can be enabled by CBRS now. Now that we've gotten the transition out of the way, people are going to now, and COVID hopefully will be out of the way, hopefully this year. We've now started to see more of a focus put on the things that CBRS is good for. And there's another $100 billion of monies that possibly could be made available in the in the next funding round coming out of the COVID relief bill, that there should be no issue with funding for anybody deploying anything. I think it'll just be, kind of things going hopefully crazy. So those are some things I see that are happening that are beginning to push the good things that could happen. On the other side, we are now dealing with, as we saw earlier in the session, the 3.45 gig band. And so I think that will add additional challenges, but I think we've met the challenges by being able to leverage the capabilities of the SAS that were not necessarily envisioned when we first started down this road. Being able to support, for example, Tdd configuration, coordination, and the like, and then also being able to do more dynamic coordination with our friends north of the border in Canada. So we'll see that come, that in the first 3.5 months of the year. 4.5 months of the year, we're into the first third, so it's I think with if I'll make a prediction, the rest of 21, it will likely see more of the use cases that CBRS has allowed, and then we'll be able to in 3 months' time, when we have our next OnGo Alliance meeting, we'll be able to talk a lot more about some of the unique aspects of CBRS that we have been waiting for the last 18 months.
Got it. Thanks, Mark. E, how about from your perspective on 2021?
Yeah, so like others said, we have about 120, 130,000 CPSD already deployed. And then the good news is we haven't found any issue with the interference of an incumbent. All the entities that SAS are supposed to protect, they are fully protected. We haven't heard any interference report from those entities. I think that's a very good news, means all the concept of CBRS has been working. So we will definitely see more deployment in this year. And also we see a lot of demand from the SAS side because we have all kinds of operators here with different kinds of use cases. Some operators, they are pretty much self-sufficient. They don't need much from the SAS. But we also have different operators. We have different requirements or different support they need from SAS. So we have done a lot of implementation work from our side to meet those demands. And then we will see those demands also get more toward this year, because of the PAL commercialization. We see that different customers may also require different services or guidance from SAS in order to allow them to use their PAL channels or even GA channels in a more efficient way. So it's going to be an exciting year.
I am unmuting now because I don't want to, in case the audio goes wonky again, I'll have to remember that. No, thanks, Yes, very, very good. So, we did hear quite a bit of discussion earlier during this sessions about the PAL status, the secondary market. Maybe start off, Gautam, with you. Where are we from your perspective in the secondary market developing, the PAL availability? Is there anything you want to make sure that folks are aware of from that regard?
Right. So I think we expect the secondary market to take off possibly later this year, purely from a commercial standpoint. That's primarily because the PAL licensees have to deploy either new sites or move their existing CBSDs to the PAL frequencies. That will settle down. Obviously, from a subleasing perspective, we are working closely with the FCC, like all the other SAS admins. There's this light touch API that's being implemented and being worked on. So the objective would be that if you're a licensee and you want to sublet, or maybe there's somebody who wants to use part of PAL, then we go through this whole light touch process to find proper channels to sublet. And also we see that there's been a whole lot of commercial activity around how much is the channel worth, how much is 10 megahertz worth in a place in Chicago or downtown New York, or how much is it worth in maybe western parts of Virginia state. It again depends. So that'll also trigger this whole new set of requirements and businesses coming together. And especially with PAL, I think we could see the explosion of devices that we perhaps have not seen yet.
Yeah, as that 130,000 number, that's 120, 130,000 number is very exciting. So this, becomes quite interesting. That Masood, to follow on, from the secondary market, the PAL development, anything want to make sure that folks are aware of there to understand?
Yeah, let me first address the. No, this is an. I'm sorry, an opportunity. Let me address the PAL first. So, as everybody knows, Sas admins have come together, and we developed a program to perform the PAL static channel assignment. This has been going on for at least starting from. Actually, we started December 28. December 28, all the winning bidders were informed, and then later on, many of those became actually licensee when they received the public notice from FCC came out. So we have almost done that process. There has been lots of work. We provided a portal to all the licensees so that they can go in and they provide their input. Our algorithm has worked on those inputs, and actually, as we speak, tomorrow afternoon is the deadline for the licensees to request potential channel swapping as a result of our initial assignment. And we are expecting by next week, actually, the next week, exactly Monday evening, Monday night, that the final assignment would be known by the end of this week, and we will make it public through some PAL database website on the WinForum site. And the PAL enablement starts next week today, actually end of Monday next week, at the midnight Pacific time is actually the time that we are enabling the commercial PAL. Of course, the generation of the PAL and the usage of the PAL is up to the operators, but all Sas admins will be able to protect the PALs and PPAs generated. And as Gautam mentioned, we've been going through the IoT and testing among Sas admins. So that's a lengthy process that we've been working on in the past several months. So after the PAL is enabled, which is next week, Monday, April, or maybe April between 19th and 20th, then obviously the process of secondary spectrum would start. And as a result of that, as Gautam mentioned, FCC has provided some means to Sas administrators called Light Touch to make the leasing and disaggregation in the Cbrs spectrum very, very efficient compared to other bands, and that is called the Light Touch process. And obviously, on top of that, Sas admins also kind of, as long as they're abiding by the rule and regulations from FCC, they would be helpful. They would be there to help the operators for the process of spectrum leasing and disaggregation. So I'm expecting that basically the Light Touch process, hopefully in the next few months, would be ready, and the Sas admins would be used that. However, the conventional process can be used. I think that's nothing prevents the conventional process of spectrum leasing to be started right from the beginning. Okay.
Got it. Thanks, Masood. Sato-san, anything that you want to make sure on your side to clarify in regards to?
Yeah, just Masood said, spectrum leasing is already happened if you're using the traditional way for the Form 6 or 8. So, but the Light Touch leasing will be implemented in the next few months. So that is a point. So thank you.
Yeah, very good. Mark, about anything to elaborate there?
Everybody ahead of me has said pretty much all I would say. I just would add that, to what Masood was saying, is that you really can't lease until you have a license. So there's a lot of lining up, getting ready to lease. We've done a ton of work interfacing with amongst ourselves, working with the commission. and with others out there. So we are all dressed up and ready to go. So it's just now we have to go to the party. So I think and that's going to come as licenses get chosen from the process that has been put together, and there's no reason to doubt that it wouldn't be a robust secondary market. Especially when you think about how the auction came about, a lot of companies that we expected that would be big players here didn't really spend a lot in auction. So a lot of us are believing, and I tend to agree with this, that they'll pick this up on the secondary market because you still get the same rights as primary. And the other thing is that secondary use or leasing allows the lessee to take advantage of that for substantial service requirements. So there are a lot of benefits that are inherent with leasing that I think will be realized over the near term and certainly in the far term. So I think we're ready to go, and I think it'll be probably more robust than in other markets just because it'll be a lot easier.
Got it. Thanks, Mark. E, anything from your side to augment on that? I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but
yeah, I just bring a use case I heard recently, and then maybe my fellow panelists can comment on that use case. So we were told that some operator, instead of have this PAL leasing operation with the FCC, they just want to share their license with another operator, for example. Is that considered as a leasing activity? Do they need to report to FCC using Form 608? Or they can just share with between the license between two operators or more. It's just an interesting use case. We are investigating this use case internally, but if the panelists have any view, I think we can discuss that.
Masood, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. I think he has brought up a very good point, and that is, we are not necessarily, and we have discussed that among ourselves. At least our SAS is very much ready to do that. The usage of the SAS is not only limited to the licensee. In other words, you can have, for example, subsidiaries or others that can use. But however, I guess there is one prerequisite, and I think maybe Mark also can comment on that. And the prerequisite is that whoever is going to use the PAL, somehow they have to have some eligibility ID or something like that from the FCC, which means that, for example, if I am a PAL licensee, I can ask, let's say, Federated Wireless SAS to allow company X to use my channel. That is okay, and that doesn't necessarily require a lot of agreement or anything for a limited area. However, that company X needs to get some eligibility from FCC, and that also Sas Admin can help to get that eligibility ID that is going through the Form 608, and also it can be done through the light touch process. So, but that doesn't necessarily, as Yi said, and I agree with Yi, that that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go through the leasing process, but the eligibility is important. And I don't know, Mark, perhaps you are more familiar with the regulatory aspect. Well,
I'd say you're right. If the leasing is going between current PAL licensees, or the sharing is going on between current PAL licensees, and if there's no consideration exchanging hands, in other words, they're not paying for it, then you really don't have a contract. So I think it's, I'm certainly not a lawyer. I just play one in webinars. So I would see what your legal people say that probably know this a whole lot better than we do. But Masood's absolutely right. The one thing that people have to be able to do is be eligible. And actually, that's the one major thing that's the difference between, a lot of people say GAA is unlicensed. In fact, it isn't. In order to be able to operate GAA, you have to be eligible to hold a license. So if you have somebody out there that's, say, a foreign national that wants to deploy CBSDs, and that would not otherwise be eligible in the United States, they would not be able to do that. But I don't think that's what you said. So I think, we have the wherewithal in SAS to manage it. I think it, it's slightly different, but I think it's certainly doable. But again, I think, your legal team probably has much more wherewithal to answer that correctly than I would. And actually, I'm eager to hear what the answer is. So, let us know.
Sato-san or Gautam? Anything?
Yeah, just one thing. That entity will be only agreed up to 4 PAL license. So if they exceed that one, so we have a problem. So maybe we Sas admin will be check the aggregation in the up to 4 license, 4 channels, so 40 megahertz. So only we can check that one. But otherwise, legal entity we will discuss internally for that one. So maybe if they, I don't know. We may discuss with the FCC about if such kind of happen that one. So, but basically I don't see any issue for that to using such kind of sources. But they have to admit from the FCC to using the PAL license. Only that we are required.
Gautam, anything to add?
No, I think I agree with Mark. I think I have to punt that to the lawyers to really figure that out. But yeah, I think the most important aspect really is that 40 megahertz is the maximum somebody can use as PAL. So even if you're sharing amongst yourselves or subleasing, there is a hard limit out there. Just to be aware of that. Okay,
good deal. Mark, I think you brought up earlier something I'd like to ask the panel about is apparently the U.S. government looked under the couch cushions and found $100 billion, and for different purposes. As one of those aspects, we've talked a little bit about the incumbent informing capability, the IIC. Curious how any of that might fit together from the Sas admin's perspective, if that's something you guys are comfortable commenting on.
That's a pretty fascinating question. I don't know that the 100 billion would be directly related to the IIC. The 100 billion is to promote broadband across the country. By the way, that's the largest chunk of money put out for broadband ever. So, I'm kind of excited about that. But the IIC, the informant incumbent capability, is being developed by NTIA. The original idea behind that was so that they could better manage spectrum around the sharing areas identified in the 345 gig band, the CPAs and PUAs, coordinated protection areas and priority use areas. So they thought that could be managed through this informant incumbent capability. So all the basis would have to do would be to get into this portal, say we're going to operate this thing during given times, and go off and protect it. Kind of like the way we developed the portal to protect the ground-based radars. So I don't know that that's connected to the 100 billion. In fact, it probably isn't, given that NTIA is funded differently. However, having said that, based on the way NTIA is developing this, they're working with the DoD, and the DoD got a chunk of change from the Cbrs auction and is going to get almost $15 billion, or supposedly, out of the 345 gig auction. And those two tranches of money at some level should help fund aspects of the IIC in later stages. So we're hopeful that the NTIA can find creative ways to get this thing stood up sooner than later. And we, the OnGo Alliance, are pushing them pretty hard to, not only dig in the seat cushions, but hold out the boot at stoplights and do whatever they need to collect monies to develop the IIC, quickly. Because we believe, I think collectively in the alliance, that it is a way to get rid of the ESC and avoid the potentials for ESC interference, not only from Cbrs but also 345. So a lot of exciting things. That's what I'm saying. In about 3 months' time, we come back together and have this panel. There will be a whole lot of neat stuff out there. I'm sure we'll be able to talk about.
You're mute, Alan.
Sorry, trying to keep the noise down, and I'm keeping the noise down, obviously. Anything to add on from your side when it comes to the IIC or even looking forward, as Mark was saying?
Yeah, I think we all hope that the IIC can happen as soon as possible in the Cbrs band. It will really remove a sort of a key pseudo incumbent in this band, which is the ESC. So that's all what we are trying now.
Understood. Sato-san, from your perspective?
I don't have anything else because we are not the ESC operator. We are only a Sas administrator. So yeah, ESC guys will be helpful. That one. Yeah.
Understood. Gautam, I'll put it to you before I turn it over to Masood.
Yeah, I think I agree with Yi. I think there has to be some way to basically have the centralized system. Obviously, placing sensors, running them across is another variable in the Cbrs equation. So if you remove that variable, it's generally better. Obviously, the sensor locations need to be protected. That means we are taking away spectrum from possibly a CBSD at that particular location. So that's something, removing that aspect is generally helpful for the industry, and you promote more usage of the band.
Got it. Well, Masood, thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you. So let me, obviously, conceptually, I agree with what Mark and other friends said, but let me add a couple of flavors from the perspective of Sas admins and ESC operators. So first of all, as far as Sas is concerned, I think we are very well equipped to exploit IIC. And we have all been tested. Currently, we are using some portal-based testing site, DoD testing site. There are exactly 11 of them that are in public. They are public. Everybody can look at the NTIA website, and there is a KML file that is for portal-based. It's called Peak. The portal-based kind of areas that we protect. So SAS is fully equipped to do that. I don't think there is any major concern from SAS side. The problem is mainly the timing and the fact that even though we all understand, and I fully agree with all the concerns that our friends raised for ESC operation, there is no doubt about that removing ESC not only removes the possibility that maybe the whole DPA neighborhood area would be activated because of the interference from 3.45 or from Cbrs. It removes a pseudo incumbent and all those things. But we have to keep in mind that it's not going to happen suddenly. So I'm very much concerned, and I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that we should not ignore the improvement of the ESC network. We should not ignore the fact that by the time IIC is fully used, we need to make sure that the ESC network operates. It doesn't cause basically the DPA blinding the whole area and making the whole area dark in terms of activating the DPA, as well as kind of the least amount of impact on the CBSDs that are deployed around. So I want to emphasize, SAS is ready to use IIC, but by that time, I think we should not de-emphasize or say anything that basically reduces the significance of working on improving the ESC networks. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks, Masood. We had one question come in a little bit earlier that I'm going to read, and I think I know the answer, but it's one that I want to put to the panel. So how will issues that arise from competing PAL spectrum grant requests be addressed if the two PAL holders are not using the same SAS admin? How is it resolved?
I can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, start off. Go ahead.
So first of all, not more than one company, one license within a county can use a PAL license in a given area. Okay, so in each county, a PAL channel is given to only one license, so there is no competition within a county. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is that if you are talking about same PAL channel, and by the way, for the licenses given to PAL licenses, those are already done, and that's a process, as I said, it's going to end this week, and we are going to start deployment next week. So there is no competition there as well. They're predefined. If you are only talking about the PAL licenses across the counties, if they are using the same channel across the counties, so as Yi had mentioned in the coexistence discussion earlier today, if those two PAL belong to the same operator, or at least if they can coordinate with each other, we can easily operate in a way that there is no impact in terms of protecting one PAL from another PAL and vice versa. That can be easily done. Sas admins have worked it out. But if they belong to different operators and they are on the same channel, which, by the way, we have tried to avoid in the PAL channel assignment as much as possible. But if that is the case, then by part 96, we have to adjust. And that's a Sas admin, to all Sas admins, that they have to adjust the power of CBSTs so that every PPA has to be protected. Keep in mind that one PPA cannot work on different Sas admins. One PPA shall be generated by one Sas admin. However, the protection among PPAs, we have a daily coordination among Sas admins that those coordination are done in a very diligent way through an IAP process.
Got it. Thanks, Masood. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to give me, one thing that they want to highlight, one thing they want to mention, make sure that we talk about. E, I'm going to start with you and put you on the spot first. But what's one thing we should take away from this first 4 months and into the rest of 2021?
Well, my key message is through the efforts of everybody in the industry, we are making CBRS working very well so far. There are still challenges in the future. I think as long as we work together diligently on those issues, we can make CBRS really prosper.
Good deal. Thanks, E. Mark, your thought.
I think this is, as Churchill said, the end of the beginning. We've spent about a year now and a half sort of in a COVID mode, and it allowed the Part 90 stuff to be transitioned. So I think, people are now going to start waking up and putting their Spectrum license to use. Between now and the next time we meet, PAL channels will be assigned. People should be using them. And we should be now fully in what we hope we would have been in, this time last year. So I'm excited about the next 3 months. It's going to be a lot going on.
Good deal. Sato-san?
Yes, I hope the next Sas Admin Panel we don't have any trouble during the power issues. So we hope the working correctly, and I don't have any issue right at this moment. So we hope the CBRS are working well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sato-san. Masood?
Yeah, thank you. Same here. Perhaps one thing that I want to add is that so CBRS through the commercial deployment in the past year and couple of months, and based on the number of CBSs, and based on the fact that, as Yi mentioned, we haven't received any major interference report in the past almost 1 year and 1 or 2 months, it showed that it works. Actually, it works. It's a sharing works, dynamic sharing works. And I'm really hoping that by learning some of the lessons from CBRS and trying to to some extent, avoid some of the potential complexities, we can extend this model to other band. I think I applaud the OnGo Alliance. Everybody knows that about 4 or 5 months ago, OnGo Alliance extended the scope from only CBRS band United States to other band inside United States as well as internationally. And I'm really hoping that in the next several months or during 2021, we try to convince other countries as well as the people who are managing other spectrum that sharing works. And that is one of the best approaches to avoid fully unlicensed as well as the exclusive license that has shown there are some problems.
Thanks, Masood. Gautam, last word on what we should look for.
Yeah, I think we should, the way the CBRS system has panned out, even if we go back just 2 years, everybody thought CBRS is going to be a science experiment and things will be problematic. We now have real networks. We have 130,000 plus CBSDs everywhere. Whole lot of use cases from from monitoring, security aspects to education to looking at SCADA networks, data-only networks. So many use cases are now using Cbrs Spectrum. So it's here and real. Also with PAL, we really foresee a whole huge jump in number of CBSDs being connected to the system, and so many more use cases.
Excellent. As always, the SAS admins, you guys, outstanding job, and appreciate your insights and your patience in doing and putting yourselves on the spot like this. It really is, I think, underscores the kind of unique ecosystem and partnership we have amongst our members. So I want to thank you all. Excellent work again, and we'll capture any other questions and we'll share those with you guys. But as always, appreciate it and thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Good deal. So one last bit of business for me as the SAS admins sign off. We'll start wrapping up here. Greatly appreciate everyone's attendance at this rebranded session that we now are referring to as OnGo Insights. I'm going to actually make an announcement too that I think you will find very interesting. And steal maybe a little bit of Oren's thunder. There's been an incredible amount of work going on in the background over the last several months to bring a new website, public website, online. And as we've been working in the session today, the last levers and switches were thrown to bring that new website online. So encourage everyone to take a look at the new ongoalliance.org. It should be making its way out into the world and connecting to the old cbrsalliance.org URL as well. So it may not be when you first look at it, it is making its way through the internet as we speak. So we're really excited about the new website and pleased to bring that online. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I know that and share that bit of information. With that, I do want to go ahead and wrap up our session today with my thanks to all of the presenters in making the inaugural OnGo Insights, I think, a real success. We're always worried about not having enough content, and we ended up with having, well, looks like just the right amount of content today, even though we were a little trying to move time around a little bit. With that, I wish everyone a good rest of your Monday. Please encourage you to join us for the other sessions during the week, both the working group. Tomorrow morning, of course, we will be doing the general session and the industry update sessions as we have. And wish everybody good health. Please stay safe, stay well. One of these days, we'll be announcing getting back together in person, and we're all looking forward to that. With that, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.